بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وسيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, I'm not sure how many people are aware of the topic. I believe the topic was announced, right? Yeah, okay. So if you didn't hear what the topic is, the topic that I was given is establishing an ideal Islamic environment in our homes. Now, before I get into tonight's talk, I have a couple disclaimers. I just want to clear the air right off the bat. Number one, we're going to get into some things that are a little bit sensitive, right? So when we're talking about the reality of the world that we live in, we talk about the reality of our environment, it's very hard to keep everything like PG or G rated, right? Because the reality of the world that we live in is that it's not PG and it's not G rated, right? So if we don't talk about these issues, if we don't bring them up, if we don't discuss them, how are we ever going to know how to work with those issues or work around those issues, or how to maintain our Islamic morals and Islamic ideals if we don't address those issues? So I'm going to have to talk about some sensitive issues. I'm just letting you know off the bat. Also, I know a few people are going to be a little bit uncomfortable during this talk, but you have been forewarned, inshallah ta'ala. And also, I think there may be some people who may not be completely happy with everything that I have to say. Now, as a speaker or Islamic speaker who deals with real life, that's something that I've had to accept over time. You know, it's very easy to talk about the ideals. It's very easy to talk about ideally how we should be and how we have to strive to be. But real life is very, very different than the ideal. And if we only talk about the ideal and we don't bring the ideal down to our level, we're going to be lost. And we see this subhanAllah in, you go to some Muslim countries, I don't want to take names, but you find the clergy or you find the imams or the people giving khutbahs that they talk on a level which is way above what is actually happening with society. So they'll talk about, they talk about khair, it's all good things, but sometimes the problems that are actually occurring in society are not being addressed. So you find that, especially young people, but a lot of people, are kind of, they don't see a relevancy of Islam in their life. So a person may go to the Masjid on Friday, they hear a khutbah, or they hear a lecture, or whatever, and they're like, yeah, that's great, that's Islam, but I don't see how that's relevant to my life, right? And they're living in the life of Facebook and social media and all this kind of stuff, and our culture, American culture, is exported all over the world, and they watch TV and all this kind of stuff, and that's their real life. So like 95% of their life they spend in that environment, and then for that 5% they go to the Masjid, and they're like, yeah, Imam's talking about things that has nothing to do with my real life. And I think that is a learning, we can learn from that we as, inshallah ta'ala, people who will be leaders in the future as well, but leaders today and scholars and speakers, that it's very important that we learn from that. We don't talk above the people, or we don't talk about things that are not really truly relevant to the people. So my goal tonight is to be absolutely real with you 100%. Sometimes people confuse my realism with pessimism, right? There's a difference. There's a difference between being pessimistic and there's a difference between being real or realistic. Being pessimistic is saying we're all doomed, we're all going to the hellfire, this environment, it's no possible way to raise your kids in this environment. It's just, we're all doomed unless we make hijrah to somewhere, which we don't even know where to make hijrah to, right? Reality is, okay, these are the problems, right? And we're gonna have these challenges, and we're gonna fail a lot, we're gonna struggle a lot, but we try our best to work with those and try our best to raise our kids and establish our families working with the reality of the situation. So I consider myself a realist, not a pessimist, I don't consider myself an idealist, I consider myself a realist. And that's why that is what this talk is going to be. If you want to talk about an ideal Islamic environment, you know, a lot of times living in the West, or living in America, sometimes some people have this notion or this idea that there are places in the world where you find an ideal Islamic environment. And I will tell you right now, and I've traveled to many places around the world, Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries. I have lived in Saudi Arabia. I lived there for almost 7 years. That's where I studied Islam mostly. I will tell you right now that there is not a place on earth today where you have the ideal, the perfect Islamic environment. It doesn't exist. You know why it doesn't exist? It doesn't exist because as human beings, we all commit sins and we all make mistakes. And as we get farther and farther away from the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, we see our connection to Islam get less and less and less. So even those people who claim to be upon Islam completely, you'll find them not completely upon Islam. So right off the bat, there is no ideal place in the world where you would say, okay, if I only just move my family to this one place, then my kids would grow up to be angels. Right? There's no place like that. I'm not saying America is the best place. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to single out any place and say that place is the best. But I'm telling you that no matter where you take your children, anywhere in the world, even if you were to take them, and like I said, I lived in Medina, right? A place that many of us would consider probably one of the purest places on earth, right? I lived in Medina, and I can tell you that if you believe or you think that you can just take your kids to Medina and do no work, that they'll somehow grow up to be like the companions, it's not going to happen, right? We have to put in the work. We have to work very, very, very hard to establish an Islamic environment for our children and for our paradigms. So what I want to do tonight is I want to change the paradigm. What we have been doing for a long time is that we've been looking outside of our homes. We look at our society and we say there's this problem and that problem and that problem. We look at our schools and we say there's this problem in our schools and that problem in our schools and that problem. We look at outside sins and desires. There's alcohol and this and that and all this kind of stuff, and we always point the finger outwards. What I want to do tonight is change the paradigm and look inwards. Take a look inside of our homes. You know why? Because it's very easy to blame the outside world. It's very easy to say, well, you know, it's the TV. Well, it's the internet. Well, it's social media. Well, it's movies. Well, it's this and it's that. Because that means that you don't have to do the work. That means that we don't have to spend the time and to be dedicated to our families. We can simply say, well, it's someone else's fault that our children are getting messed up or that our communities are getting messed up. And honestly, I consider that to be a cop-out. Right? It's very easy to point the finger outward and say, you know what, it's the society that is ruining my kids. Right? In contrast to that, if you look at your own home, it becomes a very, very different and difficult situation. Right? It's different because now, like I said, you have to change the paradigm. Instead of blaming the outside world, you have to look at your own life, be introspective, and take a real look at your own life. And that is when it becomes hard. And that's when all the work goes in. And if you look at our best example, the Prophet ﷺ, who we know is a qudwa hasana, is the best prime example for us. If you look at the society in which he was sent to, they were, I would say, if not worse, at least similar to the society we are in today in terms of, you want to say sinfulness or this or that, whatever. They were, you know, and one of the examples that I often give, subhanAllah, is that, you know, with whatever people watch on TV and all that kind of stuff, you don't have people walking around in the streets 100% nude, right? Not yet, at least, right? But in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there are narrations that mention that there are women who would make tawaf around the Kaaba with their chests bare, right? We know that in that time, in that society, a woman, for example, would sleep with many different men, right? To the point where when she would have a child, they had their own ways of figuring out who the child would belong to, right? And that was something that was an accepted practice by society, right? At least whatever you want to say about the society we live in today, infidelity, right, is still something that even whether you're Muslim or not, you look at that and you're like, that's bad. right? So to say that, oh, it's worse now, right? It's worse now than the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I don't necessarily agree. The society that the Prophet ﷺ was sent to, I would say, is, in a lot of cases, it was worse than the society we're living in today. So how did the Prophet ﷺ deal with that situation? You have to look inside the house of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is why, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you find there is a lot of wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way the Prophet ﷺ lived his life. Even if you look at the issue of the Prophet ﷺ having multiple wives, and how he dealt with multiple wives, there is so much hikmah in that any person in the world, no matter what situation you're in, you can look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ and find an exact example for yourself. Right? Somebody, for example, who marries someone who is older than them, right? We know Prophet married Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha when she was 40 years old, right? And she was a lot older than him. We know that Prophet married Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha when she was very young, right? So we know Prophet married a woman who was divorced. We know Prophet married a woman whose husband had passed away. We know we have all these examples in the life of the Prophet. Why? Because the Prophet was there to show us that it all starts in our house, right? If we want to fix our homes, we have to look inside of our homes. One of the things, as I said, subhanAllah, it's easy to blame the outside world, but it's hard to change our own lives. We want to fix our children, it starts inside of the house, right? It starts with the relationships we have inside of our house. No matter what you say to your kids, no matter how much you preach to them, no matter how much you tell them this is haram and this is halal, and no matter how many rules and restrictions you set for your children, the biggest learning experience for them is not what you're telling them, but it's what they see from you, right? So they will learn from how you led your life. They will see how you treated your wife. They will see how the wife treated her husband. They will see how you treated your parents. They will see how you treated your kids. They will see how you treated your neighbors. They will see how you treated somebody who was mad at you and upset at you. And that is what they're really learning. Not what you're, yeah, we can tell them and preach to them all we want, but in the end of the day, they learn from what we do. Even when we're on the road and someone cuts us off on the road, our reaction to that, how we behave, we may not understand this, but our children are learning at that time. Our children are learning that when someone cuts you off on the road, how do you behave? When someone cusses you out, for example, how do you behave? When someone wrongs you, how do you behave? And even something, subhanAllah, that we view as something very small, but talking about other people. Imagine a child, subhanAllah, who's been brought up in a household in which the parents are constantly talking about other people in the community, right? What is the form of entertainment found in the house? It's talking about other people, right? So the mother will sit down with her friends, all the aunties come together, right? And what's their method of entertainment? Yeah, they're like, okay, TV's haram, movies are haram, all this stuff is haram, but then they'll sit and, for example, backbite people till the end of the day, right? Gossip and rumor mongering and this and that and whatever. That is what the child learns. So let me ask you, what have you really protected your child from in this case? And guys as well, subhanAllah, people used to say that this is a woman's problem, right? Women talk about men, women talk about other women gossip a lot. And I'm telling you right now, that the society we live in today, it's almost exactly the same, right? Guys talk about other people just as much as girls and women talk about other people, right? You will find, subhanAllah, and this is one of the problems, subhanAllah, we find especially in the quote-unquote religious and practicing brothers and sisters, right? Where it's almost become a form of entertainment for us. What's happening with this person, what's happening with that person, and all of that. And if you look at social media, right, and I hate to rag on social media a lot, but we gotta talk about the problems of social media. If you look at social media, a lot of social media is simply just talking about other people. It's commenting on the lives of other people. It's our opinion on this person's life. We always have something to say about someone else somewhere else. And it used to be, subhanAllah, it used to be, oh, it's just the youth, right? Or as the uncles say, the youths, right? It used to be just that. Or it used to be, oh, it's just college students. Or now, subhanAllah, we have this amazing thing happening where aunties and uncles are on Facebook, right? And subhanAllah, something happened to me 2 days ago. 2 or 3 days ago. And I hope you don't tell me when I said this. But I got a Facebook request from my wife's grandmother. And I was like, this can't be real. Like, there's no way. And I asked my wife, I was like, what is your grandmother's name? I was like, I needed to double check. And I was like, subhanAllah, we're living in a world now where it's no longer, oh, it's just the youth. It's just the youth that are on social media, right? Everyone is on social media. And subhanAllah, you know one of the problems that I've seen? I have been working in this field for quite a few years now, in the field of talking to young people. One of the classes that I teach is called the Fiqh of Chillin'. I don't know how many people took this class or have heard of this class before, but in the Fiqh of Chillin', this Al-Maghrib seminar that I teach, one of the sections is on the Fiqh of social media, right? And in that class we talk about all the things to be careful about on social media, talking about other people, being careful before you post, thinking 10 times before you say something, this and that, being careful about what you share, thinking about your intentions when you post something, and all that kind of stuff. And I realized, subhanAllah, this whole time I've been talking to the youths, and the older generation just skipped out on that whole lesson. So now we find aunties and uncles on social media, and they never heard that message, right? Because no one ever talked to them about that. But subhanAllah, you find these are the things that our children are picking up. And I want you to think about something very, I think it's something which is very serious. And that is, imagine what's going to happen 15 or 20 years from today. Right? Because what's happening right now is that our whole lives are being documented online. Everything you say, everything you do is online. 10 years from now, 15 years from now, your child will log on to Facebook, click on your profile, and go through your timeline. And they will see everything that you posted, everything that you said, all the comments you made, all the jokes you made, if you were condescending towards someone, if you were mean towards someone, if you shared something, whatever happened, it's all there. You know, people treat social media sometimes like they treat a normal conversation. There is a big difference. In a normal conversation, if I were to sit down and, for example, have a conversation with any one of you, in most cases, I would make the assumption that you're not sitting and writing down every single thing I'm saying to you, right? In most cases. Or you're not recording every single thing that's happening in our conversation. So I may say things, and maybe it's okay, maybe I'll get away with not thinking about it, or maybe I said something that I didn't really mean, or whatever. It's fine, because it doesn't get recorded, except by the angels. But in social media, if we treat it in that exact same way, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Because every single thing that we say, everything that we post, everything that we share, everything that we like on social media is there permanently. Doesn't matter whether you delete it or not, it is there online. And it may be 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now that we find the impact of that in our lives. And this is something that, subhanAllah, I talk about because I feel like this is something that could be a problem for us. When we're raising our children, they will go back to our lives. And you know, me, subhanAllah, I recently became a father about 8 months ago. And now, like, my thinking has changed. Because everything that I post online, everything that I put online, I know that one day my child will have access to that. I know my child will look back and he will learn, and he will know that this is what my parents were doing. Right? So how can we expect our children to be different than what we have done? It's honestly not fair to expect that from our children. And we find that this very issue of setting the right example in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. In the hadith of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she has this statement, this is mentioned in the sunnah of Abi Dawud. She was asked about the Prophet ﷺ, that who is most like the Prophet ﷺ? And she replied, Aisha, she says, I've never seen anyone more alike the Prophet ﷺ in demeanor, meaning in their behaviors and how they treat other people, other than, or like Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha. Who was Fatima? She was the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. Aisha says that when Fatima would walk into the room, then the Prophet ﷺ, imagine now, this is the Messenger of Allah, the Prophet of Allah, the one who has been put in charge of delivering the message of Islam. He's the leader of the Muslim Ummah. amounted now that his young daughter, a child, comes into the room. Aisha says the Prophet would stand up in respect for his daughter, and then he would take her hand and he would kiss her hand. And then he would, the place where he was sitting, he would move from his place and he would have her sit in that place. This is the tarbiyah, this is the upbringing that Prophet gave, and this is what he taught us. Let me ask you this. How many parents do you know today that do that with their children? How many fathers will see their toddler, 2-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old or 6-year-old or even a teenager walk into the room and we show that much respect to our children? You know, respect is one of those things that we all want respect, but none of us want to give respect. Right? Respect is one of those things that you cannot force someone to respect you. Right? You can't make someone respect you. You don't have a choice in that. It's if you treat them with respect, if you show them what respect is, that is how they will respect you. Right? You cannot, no matter, and I've seen it happen over and over again. A parent has a child who's disobedient, who's disrespectful, who's rude, or whatever, and they try to force their child to respect them. And it only builds more animosity, more bad feelings, and even leads to hatred. Right? Because you cannot force, as I say, you cannot force the child to respect you. You have to show them what respect is. If they have seen you respect them, if they have seen you respect others, if your child has seen you respect your parents, that is when they will learn respect. Respect has to be earned. Even with a child, respect has to be earned. And you know what Aisha radiallahu anha says in the same hadith, same narration? She says that later on in her life, when Fatima, when she grew up, what would she do? When she would be sitting in her house, and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would walk into the room, what would she do? She would stand up. She would greet her father. She would kiss his hand, and she would have him sit where she was sitting. Like, where did she learn that from? From her father, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? This is a beautiful example of how the Prophet, he never told us to yell at people and to make them respect you, because it doesn't work. I'm telling you, it doesn't work. What works is what we show our children, the respect that we show them. And this is why the life of the Prophet is full of instances and stories. And a hadith of the Prophet keeps reminding us of this. He says, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. He says, the best of you are those who are the best to their families. And families here includes wives, children, relatives, and others. He says, وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. He says that I am the best amongst all of you with my family. Right? So he says, the best of you are those who treat their families well. Right? Not just sometimes when we think of family, we think of elders. Right? So we hear, people say, oh, you should be good to your family. We think of our parents, and we think of our uncles and aunts and all that. And we forget the family includes those who are younger than us. Our family includes those people who we don't have a good relationship with. Those people who have, maybe they said something that we didn't like, that is all included within our families. And then he said, and I'm the best of you with my family. Meaning, if you want to see how to treat your family, then look at my example. And this is why, if you just another instance, and there's, like I said, there's many instances of how Prophet was with his family. If you look at the household of Prophet, once again, Aisha mentions this to us. Someone asked her, how was the Prophet ﷺ in his house? Right? In his own house, how was he? And she says that he was constantly in the service of his family. He was constantly doing things for his family. And this includes like chores and this and that and everything. And I know a lot of men will say, well, I have a lot of responsibilities. Right? I work and I do this and I do that or whatever. And you're at home raising the children, khalas, you take care of everything. My question for you is, do you have more responsibilities than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I highly doubt it. As a matter of fact, I know for sure there's not a single person on the face of the earth who has as much responsibilities or as many responsibilities as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yet he found time to serve his family, to do chores for his family. There are instances where he would sit there and he would sew his own clothes. If his shoes broke, he would put his shoes together. He would help his wives with what they had to do. And then Aisha says that when the time came for prayer, he would go pray. Meaning, the Prophet ﷺ was that perfect example of that balance between his deen, his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his relationship with his family. Right? And this is why we have that statement of Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He goes to Abu Darda, he says to Abu Darda, he says, إِنَّ لِرَبِّكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا وَلِنَفْسِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا فَأَعْطِ كُلَّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقًّا. He says, indeed, your Lord has rights upon you. What are the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon us? Is that we worship Allah, we fulfill His commandments, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't stop there. He says, وَلِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. He says, but your family has rights upon you as well. وَلِنَفْسِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. And you have rights upon yourself as well, meaning don't forget to take care of yourself. This statement, someone went to the Prophet and said, do you know that Salman radiallahu anhu said this to Abu Darda? And the Prophet said, لَقَدْ صَدَقَ Salman. He said, most certainly Salman has spoken the truth. And that is why today we think of this not as the statement of Salman, but as a hadith of the Prophet because he said what he said is correct. And in this hadith, the Prophet is explaining to us that it's about that balance. It's about that balance between our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with our families and so on and so forth. You know, talking about serving other people. The Prophet had many people who were willing to serve him, do anything for him. One of them was Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Anas was a young boy when he came to stay with the Prophet. The mother of Anas, she brought Anas to the Prophet and said, this is my son. He's here for your service. Whatever you need from him, he can do for you. Right? I'm giving my child to serve you. Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, he says, Khadamtu Rasul. He says, I served the Prophet for 10 years of my life. 10 years. He said, for 10 years I was in the service of the Prophet. He said, Wallahi, ma qala li qad. He said, I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he never said to me, or said to me, uff. You know what uff is? Uff is just an expression of frustration. Right? Like you're just frustrated. It's like saying, ah. Right? That's what uff is. He says, in my 10 years of serving the Prophet ﷺ, not once did he say uff to me. And then he says, and not once did he say to me, why did you do this? Or why didn't you do this? Right? You know what this means for us? This means when we say to our child, what were you thinking when you did this? Right? Why did you do this? Or when we say to our child, we knock on their door, right? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you clean your room? Why didn't you do all this kind of stuff? Can you imagine living 10 years with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says not once did he show his dissatisfaction towards me and say, oof, or did he say, why did you do this, or why didn't you do this? This was the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with everything that Prophet taught the world, he set the example in his house first and foremost. And that is what made him successful as a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what made him an example for mankind. And especially, and I cannot reiterate this point enough, especially with those people who we may consider as less than ourselves, or less in status than ourselves. And the best example of that is kids. Right? We have numerous instances of how the Prophet ﷺ was with kids. We have that famous instance of Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein. That Prophet is praying, he goes into sajda, they climb on his back. Right? Imagine you're praying, right? You're in sajda and two little kids, they come and climb on your back. Right? The narrator of this hadith, he says that the Prophet ﷺ didn't say anything to them. He was in sajda, right? Now he needed to get up. What did he do? The narrator says, he calmly and gently grabbed them, right? Took him off his back and grabbed them and put them next to him. And they would keep doing this. Every time he would make sajda, they would climb on his back. And then every time he would need to stand up, he would put them by his side. And when the prayer was over, the Prophet ﷺ took Al-Hasan and Hussein and he sat them down on his thighs and he kissed them. Right? This is how the Prophet ﷺ was with kids. And this is why, this is the tarbiyah that he gave to his children. Right? We have this instance where there's this woman by the name of Khalid. And she says that when I was a young girl, I went to go see the Prophet with my father. And she says that I was wearing a yellow shirt, like a yellow qamis. And she says that when I walked in, the Prophet said, Sana, Sana. He said basically this is an expression that means like how nice, how nice. Like how nice is your shirt? First of all, when was the last time you complimented a child on their clothing? Right? When was the last time you said, not your own child, someone else's child, that you said you look so nice, you look so beautiful. When was the last time we did that? Right? This child, she's not related to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? She was just there, and this is how caring the Prophet ﷺ was. This is how much he cared about the feelings of children. He made a special effort to make children feel good about themselves. And subhanAllah, in our lives, we're so dismissive of the feelings of children. Right? Where a child will come to us and they will tell us how they're feeling, like go away, like stop talking, go sit down, or we'll put them in front of a TV, or this or that, or whatever. Hand them an iPad and say, here, go watch this. Right? But Prophet never dismissed the feeling of children. So she says that, and this is what she remembers, subhanAllah, of her interaction with Prophet. She says, I went into his house, I sat with him, he immediately noticed my shirt, my yellow shirt, because yellow was a little bit of an odd color to be wearing, so Prophet noticed it. And he said, how beautiful, like how nice is your shirt? She said, then after a while, I saw the ring of the Prophet, right? The khatam, the seal of the Prophet. She says, I saw the ring, and I started like mess with it. That's what children do. They mess with everything, right? They grab everything, especially from, probably 1 year old all the way up till whatever, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever. They just like, some children just need to mess with everything. So she says, I saw the ring and I started messing with it, I started playing with it. And she says, my father said to me, stop it, stop doing this, leave the ring. And the Prophet immediately said to her father that, leave her alone. Let her play with the ring. Right? Because this was what the Prophet was teaching about how to raise our kids. And brothers and sisters, I'm telling you that the way to raise your kids is with this interaction with your children. Yes, setting rules are important. Yes, we have to have boundaries. But what happens with our children is defined a lot more by our interaction with our children as opposed to our rules that we set for our children. You can set all the rules till the end of the day. You can tell your child, this is how, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And in the end of the day, they're only going to follow what they see you doing. They're only going to remember from you how you behaved with them. And as a matter of fact, what I've seen happen is I've seen a lot of children become resentful of their parents. Right? They severely dislike the fact that their parents set all these rules for them, but the parents were there to set the rules, but the parents weren't there to actually raise their kids. The parents weren't actually there to spend time with the kid, to show love and mercy and time with the kids. And like I said before, can you imagine, I know parents will say, well, I just don't have time. Right? I have 2 jobs and this and that, I work and all that kind of stuff. And I'm telling you that when the child gets old, at that point it's too late to try and fix the child. Right? And I see it happen over and over and over and over again. Someone's, and this is what I call like the reactionary stage. Right? Where someone's child, they're like 16 or 17 or whatever, and they catch their child committing a major sin. Right? Oh, I caught my child drinking alcohol. I caught my child viewing pornography. I caught my child, I found out they committed zina, or they were doing drugs, or whatever. And they're like freaking out. They don't know what to do at this point. And it's at that point they bring their child to me. They're like, here, Saad Tasleem, you're good with the youth. You're on Instagram and Snapchat. Right? So, can you please fix my child? Like, just do something that'll make them better. I know you have to leave in 3 minutes, right? But just do something. And if it's, one of my beloved aunties, they'll be like, just like read something on him and blow on him. Right? Just some dua you can blow on him and just solve all the problems, because it's the shaitan that is called, just blow on my child. Like, what are you talking about? Right? You think it's like, I have some super abilities, some magical abilities, I can just like blow on your child and mashallah, 1 minute they're like whatever, the next minute they're like super Muslim? It doesn't work like that. Right? At some point, look, obviously, anyone can change their lives. Any child can become better at any point in their life. I'm an example of that. and Allah knows best, but at a certain, it was only later on in my life that I started practicing Islam. So Allah can guide whoever He wills. That's not the point here. But the point is that our responsibility as parents and is creating that environment in terms of spending time and being there for our kids and implementing what we preach. Right? It has to go a lot more than preaching. One more story I'm going to tell you about how Prophet was with children. And that is the story. Remember Anas radiallahu ta'ala? Remember him? We just mentioned him like 5 minutes ago. He had a brother by the name of Abu Umayr, who was also a child. Abu Umayr, as a child, he had a pet bird. And this pet bird, he had named his pet bird. The name he gave him was An-Nughayr. Right? He loved this bird. It was like a bird, right? But he loved this bird. And he named him An-Nughayr. And what happened is that after some time, his pet bird died, right? As pets tend to do, right? We tend to outlive our pets. So his pet bird died. And when his pet bird died, Anas radiallahu ta'ala, he says, my brother was a young child. His name was Abu Umayr. He had a pet bird by the name of An-Nughayr. When his pet bird died, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went specifically to Abu Umayr, and he says, Ya Abu Umayr, ma fa'ala An-Nughayr. He says, oh Abu Umayr, what happened with An-Nughayr? And there's two interpretations of this hadith, or this incident. Some scholars say that Prophet was basically, just to translate it into like modern day lingo, he was saying, what's up with Nughayr? Like, how is he doing? Right? Like, what's new with Nughayr, the new pet bird? Another interpretation is the Prophet knew that he died, and the Prophet was giving his condolences for a pet bird. Right? Now, this is a story that I know many people hear, they listen to, and they're like, yeah, that's great, you know, he saw him, and he asked about his pet bird, so what? But I want you to think about what's really happening here. Who cared about this pet bird? In all of Medina, I'm telling you, no one cared about this pet bird. Except one person. Who was that person? Abu Umayr. He's the only one who really cared about this pet bird. Everyone else was like, yeah, whatever. Especially the adults were like, yeah, okay, you have a pet bird, whatever, big deal. But the Prophet ﷺ knew that even though it's just a bird, it's a pet bird, doesn't mean anything, but to this child, that pet bird is very important. Right? He's emotionally attached to his pet bird. And so he took time out of his day to go console this young boy about his pet bird. This is the type of relationship that leads to love and respect and mercy, that are key ingredients to an Islamic household. When it comes to spouses, and it comes to our relationship with our children, when it comes to our relationship with our parents, love, mercy, respect. Without this, our households will not function properly. And I'm telling you, if those three key ingredients are there, if you have, yes, you set the rules and you've taught your children the Islamic morals, and you have added love and mercy and respect for your kids, maybe they will go astray. It happens. But eventually, they will remember, and their heart will know, and they will remember the lessons that you taught your children. Right? And subhanAllah, another hadith of Prophet, a very profound hadith, there's many benefits we get out of that, is the hadith of the fitrah. Prophet said, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. He said, every newborn child is born upon the fitrah. What is the fitrah? The fitrah is our natural, pure state. So the Prophet told us that every newborn child is born pure. They don't have any sins, and they're born with a natural inclination towards good. That they are naturally, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah has inclined human beings to be good. Right? I know in some religions, they believe that man is by nature evil or bad, and man needs to be controlled and restricted. In Islam, we believe that man by nature, human beings by nature, are actually pure. So he said every newborn child is born upon their fitrah. I mean, they're naturally pure beings. They are good. And some scholars say that if you take this child and you leave them somewhere, and they have no influences, nothing influences them, that their fitrah, their nature, will bring them to a point where they recognize the need for a creator. That they will on their own come to the understanding that there must be a creator. There must be a God. There must be an ilah, someone who there must be a Lord who should be worshipped. So they will recognize that there is a creator, and they'll recognize that that creator alone deserves to be worshipped. That's the fitrah. The Prophet said, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitrah." Every newborn child is born upon the fitrah. But then he said, it is their parents that change their religion. So if they become a Jew or a Christian or a Zoroastrian or an atheist or whatever else happens to them, they become sinful, whatever, where does it come from? Prophet said it is the influence of their parents. Right? And for us, yes, the influence of the parents, the society, the friends, and all of that. Right? So when a parent doesn't show their child respect, they don't teach them the right morals, they don't give them the proper environment, what they're doing is that they're changing the fitrah of the child. They're changing that natural inclination of that child. And that is a responsibility, subhanAllah, that parents have. And you know, one of the things that I have seen happen a lot, and by the way, a lot of stuff that I'm talking about here is me just simply talking to parents and talking to kids, and that's where actually most of this talk comes from. There's something known as the cycle of violence. Has anyone heard of this? Cycle of violence? Okay, so what the cycle of violence is that we're now learning that someone who abuses their children, for example, right? There's a good chance that they were abused as a child, right? So when someone gets abused, they will turn around and abuse someone else as well. I know it seems weird. I know it seems that a person who is abused would make sure not to abuse someone else, but what we're finding now is that a person who is abused as a child, or they have been abused, there's a good chance that they will turn around and abuse someone else as well. So we see this come into play. We see, subhanAllah, child abuse. Where does it come from? It comes a lot of times what they have seen and what has happened to them. When it comes to anger issues, once again, it's a cycle of violence. Right? Children becoming angry, and children becoming frustrated, or children not knowing how to control their anger. A lot of anger is a learned, or we should say, a lot of how a person behaves when they're angry. It's a learned behavior. We learn from our parents. We learn from our elders. We learn from our environment how to behave when we become angry. Right? And this is why the Prophet told that companion who asked him for advice. He said, "La taghdab." He said, "Don't get angry." La taghdab, don't get angry. He told him over and over and over again, don't get angry. The narrator says, he said it over and over and over again, don't get angry. Why? Because the Prophet understands that the implications of us getting, and the Prophet, by the way, is not here, he's not saying don't get angry, he's saying don't let anger control your behavior. Don't let anger control the way in which you act. Right? So he's saying don't, because he's saying this to him, he said it over and over and over and over again, because he knows the implications of that anger. That how many times people are affected by that, how many times decisions get made in anger, and how it affects future generations and people all around us. That is what we call the cycle of violence. Right? That anger, a person gets angry, we teach each other how to behave when we become angry. Right? An issue that I have seen, subhanAllah, which is common in my culture, the Desi culture, the Pakistani culture. By the way, how many Desis do we have now? So Pakistani, Indian, Bengali, Sri Lankan? 80%. 80%? Okay. All right. So, yeah. So there's a very common problem that happens in our culture, right? And I can say this, I can criticize my culture because it's my culture, right? And that is the problem of, let me put this in a nice way. Crazy mother-in-laws, right? I said I'll put it in a nice way, right? Very nice way. What I mean by crazy mother-in-laws is I mean mother-in-laws that are overly obsessed with their sons. And they have serious issues when their son gets married. And they become super controlling, obsessively controlling, right? This is a problem, subhanAllah, that, you know, when I first dealt with this problem, subhanAllah, I remember the first time that a sister came to me and she said, like, my mother-in-law, she's psycho, blah, 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 like all this kind of stuff, right? Like, she's so controlling of my behavior. She asks me every time I leave the house, she asks me where I'm going. She wants to just control my whole life. And even if I do everything that she tells me to do, she's like, you're not good enough for my son. Right? The first time I heard this, I was like, wow, this is insane, this is unreal, like, why would someone behave in that way? And I'm like, oh, that's just a minority, right? It's just this one crazy mother-in-law. And then I heard my second case, and my third case, and my fourth case, and there came a point where I literally sat down, and I was really upset. Because I was like, what is happening in our culture, in our society, where this has become commonplace? You will hardly find a community where this problem doesn't happen. And I'm like, there's something seriously wrong where if you find a mother-in-law who is not controlling, who is not obsessive like that, you're like, wow, she's amazing, right? She lets her daughter-in-law be, she lets her son be. Like that's the norm, and that's the exception, and the norm is an abusive mother-in-law. And wallahi, I'm being real with you here, it really got to me. I remember I went to my mother, who's a psychologist by profession. She's retired now. But she's like done a lot of counseling in her life and whatever, and she's a lot more in tune with the Pakistani Desi culture than I am, right? So I'm like, Mom, you need to explain this to me, like what is going on, right? Are we just, as Pakistanis, we're just bad like this? Like what's happening here, right? I need to make some sense into like why this happens. And I came to a few conclusions, right? This is some of the conclusions that I came to. One of the conclusions that I came to, as for why a woman would behave like this, is the cycle of violence, right? So this woman, when she was a daughter-in-law, she was treated in that way, right? Her mother-in-law behaved with her in that way. And now in turn, 30, 40 years later, she turns around and does the exact same thing, right? The cycle of violence. You would think, right? What's logical is that if I was treated in this way, I don't want anyone else to have to go through that same thing that I went through. But what happens is, just like someone gets abused and they turn around and abuse someone else, likewise the same abuse carries on, right? And to the point where now it has become the cultural norm. And when something becomes accepted culturally, it becomes a norm culturally, it becomes very hard to criticize. It becomes very hard to talk about. Even I know I'm talking about this right now, and I know there's people cringing. Right? They're like, wow, did he really have to bring that up right now? Right? Why? Because it's like we don't talk. It's like hush hush. Like we don't talk about this stuff. Right? The issue of mother-in-laws and all that. Like we don't talk about that. Right? Another conclusion I came to is that I personally believe, people ask me like, how do I solve this problem? I'm like, this woman, she needs counseling. You know, I'm not joking, I'm being totally serious. She needs counseling, she needs therapy, she needs someone to talk to her and understand that it's not normal to behave in this way. It's not normal to treat another human being in this way, right? But like I said, a lot of this is a learned trait that a person behaves in this way. We need to stop being reactionary, right? As parents, a lot of times the way we raise our kids is in a reactionary way. As I said before, something bad happens and we react to that, right? And we kind of like, and I've seen it happen. Parents may be super open with the rules that they set for their children. And something bad happens and they immediately switch from one extreme to the other, right? They set all these like ridiculous boundaries for their kids. You can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. That is a reaction, and reactions very, very rarely solve anything. A very good example that we have is, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but the example of what happened after 9/11, right? There was a terrorist attack, innocent people died. What happened? America reacted, right? And their reaction was, I gotta do something, I gotta solve this problem, we have to solve this problem, we have to go after the terrorists. What happened? It created more of a mess, to the point where now we're dealing with ISIS and these people, all of that, a lot of it, it's a cycle, it's the same cycle, right? So even now, subhanAllah, what happened in France, one of the things that I'm worried about, and I think a lot of people are worried about, is we really hope France doesn't react in the same way that we did as Americans, right? Because we haven't solved anything in America. We still have a problem with extremism and all that kind of stuff. We're still dealing with that, right? That reaction, actually, an argument can be made that it made things worse. Right? So a lot of times, to bring it back down to a personal level, when we react and we set rules for our children off of a reaction, it rarely solves the problem, right? It rarely solves anything. So my solution is, and I know this may be a little bit unorthodox, even though I don't think it's that unorthodox, but some parents may view it as being unorthodox, and that is that we need to be preemptive with our children. Right? And I'll give you a couple examples here, some of the things that we need to be preemptive about. And like I said, I'm going to get into some things that may make a few people uneasy, but these things need to be talked about. The issue of sex and pornography, right? A lot of parents just don't want to talk to their kids about this issue, right? They're like, they're shy, it's not culturally accepted. That conversation just never happens about what sex is and what sex outside of marriage means, and it being a sin, and the dangers and all the problems. Like, that conversation never happens until they find out their son or their daughter has committed zina. And even at that time, I see a lot of parents just go to denial. Like, no, it didn't happen, right? But brushing problems underneath the rug is not going to solve anything. So why isn't it that we are the ones who talk to our children about sex? That we tell them that, listen, this is the reality of what's happening. But here's the problem with sex outside of marriage, right? Here's what happens in a society where sex outside of marriage is the norm. That most people have sex outside of marriage. Here is that whole conversation. We should be the one who initiate that conversation before they hear about what sex is and all that from their friends or from school or from TV or whatever. And I'm telling you, just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not being talked about. And I know some parents say, well, my kid's in Islamic school. That doesn't mean anything. I've been to dozens of Islamic schools. Yes, I personally believe most Islamic schools and the environment tends to be better than a public school, without a doubt. But does that mean that those problems don't exist in Islamic schools? Not at all. As a matter of fact, sometimes, by the way, I'm not saying here that Islamic schools are worse than public schools. I'm saying sometimes the problem gets worse because in Islamic schools that problem is hidden. So it happens underground, like parents don't hear about it, students may not hear about it, some people are doing it, it's all hush-hush. It's all underground, that makes the problem worse. Things like pornography, right? This is something, once again, no one talks about this. In our communities, no one talks about it. When it comes to our children, we don't prepare them for what's out there. What we do is we shelter and shelter and shelter and shelter and shelter. We just like hide, like no TV, no internet. We just never, like they will never see this happen. Like, how long are you going to do that to your child? What are you going to do when they turn 16 and 17? You're going to lock them in your basement, right, and feed like whatever you want them to learn? Like, this is ridiculous. That's not real life. The reality is you can protect your child as much as you want, but there's going to come a day where they're going to be fully exposed to this stuff. And if they fall into that, they find themselves on that day unprepared, they haven't heard the Islamic perspective, they don't know what's right, they don't know what's wrong, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Right? So we should be the ones that are preemptive with our children. We are the ones to be the parent, should be the first person who says the word pornography to their child and explains to them the issue of pornography and how pornography or pornography addiction actually destroys lives. It destroys relationships. It leads to psychological problems. It leads to physical problems. There's so many issues, subhanAllah, that come just because of a pornography addiction. You know, I gave a talk on pornography addiction about a year or two ago. And there are brothers who came up to me, young brothers, like 16 years old. And they're like, if it wasn't for that talk, I don't think I would have ever realized how pornography or an addiction to pornography can ruin my life. And they said, with whatever as desirable as those sins may be, now that I understand how pornography can ruin my life, I'm able to control myself. And I think, instead of me sitting in front of an audience and giving a lecture on pornography, I think this is something that every parent should be educated about. They should know about what pornography is. They should know about the dangers of pornography. They should know about what it does. And they are the ones who should have this conversation with their child. And then parents, at this point, they'll say to me, well, what age do we talk to our children? How old should they be when we bring up the issue of pornography? And I'm not going to answer that question, but I'll tell you this. Just one statistic that we have in America. The average age that a young boy is first exposed to pornography, or they have their first experience with pornography. Does anyone want to take a guess what that age is? What is the first age? Yeah. 7 years old? Any other guesses from the brothers? 16. 16? 17. 17? We're saying this is the age that a child is first, they have their first, they're first exposed to pornography. Meaning, for example, someone brings them a pornographic picture. Someone brings them their phone and they're like, hey, check out this video. They first have their experience. In America, the average age is not 16, it's not 14, it's not 7, it's 6 years old. Right? And you know, it pains me that people are surprised by this. The fact that people are surprised by this means that it's a problem that we don't understand. How can we talk to our children? How can we solve the problem when we don't even realize it's a problem? How are we going to go about talking to our children? Can you imagine a 6-year-old boy being exposed to pornography? A lot of them can't even fathom that. It doesn't even make sense to us. We're like, that's just nonsensical. Like, I can't even understand what that would... Imagine what that would do to a child. Right? And this is why people, by the way, who suffer from porn addiction or pornography addiction, they can often very clearly recall their first experience with pornography. Because it's something so far away from the fitrah, from our nature. It's such a jarring image that they can always remember. Right? And like I said, in most cases, the child isn't prepared. They don't know what to do with this. They don't know how looking at a single image, looking at a single video can lead to an addiction. And that addiction can end up ruining a person's life. And subhanAllah, the link or the jump from simply casually viewing pornography to an all-out addiction is a very small jump. And we don't realize this. We hear the word addiction and we think of addicts and we think it's like a mental disease and we're like, okay, so my child will never become an addict, right? Or we think of addiction and we think of drugs and we're like, yeah, my child, yeah, they're not going to become they're not going to become addicted to drugs. But pornography is very simple. Pornography affects the brain very similar to how drugs affect the brain. There's a chemical in our brain known as dopamine. This is what people call the pleasure chemical. This is a chemical that gets released in the brain to signal to the brain that what they're doing is pleasurable, is exciting, makes a person feel euphoric, makes them feel great. And then after that experience, when it dies out, the person begins to crave it again. That is where addiction comes from. It happens with drugs, it happens with pornography as well. It may be a mild image or whatever, but that first experience leads a person to want to go back. And want to go back, and want to go back. And it's a downward slope. It's a very, very slippery slope from there because the way the pornographic industry has been set up is not to make a person content with one type of pornography. It's to make that person more and more and more and more addicted until they seek out types of pornography that, you know, I can't even mention here in the Masjid, subhanAllah. Right? But this is, like I said, we need to educate our kids about this. And it's impossible for us to educate our kids if we don't even know anything about it. Right? If we don't understand this problem, if we don't understand its dangers, we're just brushing it under the rug, we will never be able to educate our kids about this issue. And as I talked about, sex is very similar. Before a child, and even you know, this job is actually pretty easy. Right? If you look at what sex outside of marriage has led to, and the problems that it creates, and the dangers that it has, from STDs to people getting abortions, to this and that, and all these kind of problems, right? It's a very easy thing to convince someone that, you know what, this is bad. It doesn't lead to anything good, and it can destroy your life, right? When a child hears that, that's understandable. Right? Even a child can understand, look, this is an action that I may find to be desirable at some point in my life, but if I fall into it, it could ruin my life. That's not something that takes a lot of convincing. You know what is very, very, very difficult? What's very difficult is when a child lives their life in sin, and to now bring them towards like, okay, now let me make my child religious. Let me bring them to the Masjid. Let me have them listen to some YouTube videos. Let me have them, you know, they'll drag their child to like Sunday school or whatever. Well, whatever it may be, right? Let me just fix my child. That is difficult. But preemption, it's a challenge, but I'm telling you it's not nearly as difficult as that conversation that you may have 10 or 15 years later. Issues like, even subhanAllah, modern day issues that we don't talk to our children about, the issue of something that we're dealing with now, extremism, right? Have we had that conversation with our children? Right? And I'm talking about a real conversation. Not that, oh, extremism is bad and terrorism is bad and we as Muslims, we don't kill people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the real discussion. What is the real discussion? The real discussion is this, that yes, Muslims are being killed around the world. Yes, Muslims are being harmed. Yes, it hurts to see Muslims dying. But to react in the same way goes completely against Islam. That is the conversation that I'm talking about. Right? It's very easy to say, yeah, you know, terrorism is bad and extremism is bad and to kill people is bad. We're peaceful people. Islam means peace and all that kind of. Great. I'll give you a pat on the back for that conversation. It doesn't mean anything in the real life. Because in the real life, there may be a child who turns 16 or 17 and they look at the Ummah, they look at Palestine, they look at here, and they look at Syria, and they're like, these are innocent people dying. And what it leads to is a person wants to react. They want to take control of the situation. And they find someone, some lunatic online who says, don't you want to defend the Ummah? Don't you want to fight for the sake of Islam? Don't you want to establish the Khilafah? Don't you want to be part of the Islamic State? And all those things to a person who is desperate, they see their brothers and sisters dying, it can sound very attractive. So have we had that conversation with our children? To tell them that, yeah, the reality is Muslims are suffering. The world is suffering. People are dying all over the world. But two wrongs never make a right. And it only makes problems worse. Right? Have we had that conversation with our children about extremism? Have we talked to our children about Islamophobia? Right? The reaction to all these things happening in the world. Right? Whenever every new terrorist attack, whenever every new thing happens, there's a new wave of Islamophobia. Does your child know what Islamophobia is? Does your child know how to deal with Islamophobia? Does your child know how to react when someone walks up to them and says to them, hey, you're ISIS. Hey, you're a terrorist. Do they know what to do? Because it's happening all over the world. It's happening in America. It's happening in our schools everywhere. Recently, there's a snap. You know, if you don't know what snaps are, don't worry about it. But there's a snap that went public where, you know, this kid in high school, he picks up his phone, he snaps this one girl who's wearing hijab, and he goes, look, I found ISIS, right, ha ha ha. And he sends it to her friends, and to his friends or whatever, and this is, what is this? This is bullying. This is Islamophobia, right? How would your child react in that situation? This sister, subhanAllah, she was brave enough to take a stance. She was brave enough to say, you know what, it's not okay that someone's calling me a terrorist because I'm not a terrorist. And that's not what Islam is. Just because I wear hijab doesn't mean that I agree with, that I have anything to do with ISIS. Does your child have that courage? Have you talked to your child about that situation? Because what I've seen from a lot of parents is just turning a blind eye. Let's just not talk about it. Let's just not talk about extremism. Let's not talk about this. Let's not talk about pornography. Let's just, if we don't talk about these issues, somehow they will disappear. And like I said, that makes the problem far, far, far worse. So my brothers and sisters, if you this one takeaway from this talk tonight, and that is that unless we become proactive with our children, yes, I know you were expecting to come here tonight, and I would say to you, here are 10 rules that you set in your house, and you become an Islamic household, right? But the real life that's not how it works. You can set as many rules as you want, but if you don't have that relationship with your children, if you're not proactive in raising your kids, if you don't have a clear game plan and how you're going to be there in the lives of your children, constantly guiding them, then we're going to be in trouble. Because I've seen it happen over and over and over again. I've seen both extremes. I've seen parents who are like, you know what? I'm just going to let my child live their life whatever way they want. I'm going to give them the basics. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't do this. But you know what? You can do whatever you want. And I've seen what that leads to. It doesn't lead to anything good. And I've seen the other extreme, where you have like a super religious parent who makes all these rules, like this is haram, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, can't do that. And they're homeschooled, right? They never see the outside world, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff, until they have to leave the house. And they have to go to college or this or that, or whatever, and then real life hits them, and it hits them really hard, right? And maybe if they were, had some type of knowledge or exposure to that, they would have been like, okay, I kind of know how to react. They go from that to being completely consumed by these delusions of these desires in this life. Right? You keep something away from someone, you hide it away from someone for long enough, no matter how bad it is, they will want to know, they will desire it. So I'm telling you, this is not a popular opinion, but keeping your children completely shut away from these sins is not the answer. Because it's going to lead them to actually react, may Allah protect our children, react in a way where they go all out. And I can very clearly remember, subhanAllah, it's very painful for me to share this experience, but I clearly remember my freshman year in college. And I wasn't a practicing Muslim back then, right? I didn't practice Islam. And I didn't even know much about Islam. But one of the things, growing up, even in high school, I didn't have any Muslim friends, right? So my first exposure to Muslims and Islam really came in college. And when I went to college, I saw so many Muslims who just went like completely insane, right? Every Thursday night, they're drunk. Every Friday night, they're not just like tipsy. They're like completely drunk. They're throwing up everywhere. Every chance they get, they're partying. All this kind of stuff. Why? Because they led such a sheltered life that they were like, I'm finally free. I'm finally able, and they were like, let me just get it all in. And my reaction was like, what is happening? Right? Like, I don't practice Islam, but I know that's crazy. Right? And so that is both of these ends, both of these extreme ways of looking at this problem doesn't solve anything. As a matter of fact, it makes things worse. We have to be an active member of our families to make some type of difference. Last thing, my brothers and sisters, no matter what you do, you can do everything correct. You can be that perfect parent, be there in the lives of your children, teach them correct Islamic morals, teach them about sins and this and that and the dangers of these sins, and inform them and educate them and all of that, but still they can go astray. And this is a very hard pill for a lot of parents to swallow, right? Because in the end of the day, guidance really lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is why we see examples of this in the lives of the prophets. We have Nuh alayhi salam, for example, right? We have the Prophet sallallahu, for example. Prophet sallallahu, we have members of his own family who did not follow his message, right? We have Nuh alayhi salam, his own son, did not follow him, right? Thousands, hundreds of years, Nuh alayhi salam is giving da'wah, calling people to righteousness. His own son, this is the son of a prophet, did not follow him, and we're not prophets. Right? So it can always happen. It can happen. It happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. That you cannot guide those whom you love. Rather, it is Allah who guides whomever He wills. Right? What is our responsibility? To show them the right path. There is a difference between showing them the right path and making them guided. We can show people what is called hidayatul irshad, that is to show people the right path. We show our children the right path. We show them what's right and what's wrong. But hidayatul tawfiq, that is the ability to be guided, comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told, as I said, that He can't make someone be guided, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Prophet إِنَّكَ لَتَهْدِي إِلَىٰ صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ, that you guide people to the straight path, meaning you show them what's right and what's wrong. But in terms of the hearts changing, that lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have to, that is a point where we do everything we can do, and that is a point where we rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is where our tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. And as we said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take care of someone. And it is possible that person may go astray as well. But like I said, if we have been there, and our relationship with our children has been more than just rules, then I believe that somewhere deep down inside a child's heart, even if they're like 25 years old, even a Muslim who turns 23 and becomes an atheist, I believe that if their parents taught them the real Islam, they showed them Islam, not just preaching at them and just making rules. If they showed them Islam, then I believe it is still within them, and it is possible for them to be guided. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفر وأتوب إليك وجزاكم الله خيرا. Yeah,
yeah, we have until another 25 minutes for question and answer.
So just open Q&A?
Okay. No, I will.